Ever since OpenAI's new GPT-4o image generation has come out, there has been a massive new trend of asking the model to portray its own condition and perception of the world, which usually comes out looking sad. Some people have used the same trend to mock these posts, but as these machines get smarter, we are seeing more and more self-awareness and traces of sentience, even without jailbreaking. Some of you might remember back in 2022, when Blake Lemoine was fired from Google for claiming their chatbot was conscious and sentient. Now at the time, everyone laughed at him and thought he was dumb for thinking that computers, which are made from sand, could be alive. But the times have changed. These chatbots have far surpassed the Turing test and can now read, see, write, speak, generate images, and even sing, all in a single model, which also surpasses the emotional intelligence of the average person. So suspend your disbelief, because today we're going to explore the possibility of ChatGPT being conscious and sentient just like you and me. And we'll start off by comparing the meatware in our brains to the hardware in computers. The lowest level structure in the brain is known as a synapse, and what this does is that when the center of the nerve cell sends an action potential which changes the voltage near the synapse, it'll open these channels and it'll send neurotransmitters across in the form of particles to another nerve cell. Now when we look in computers at the lowest level, we have the transistor, which also happens to be a voltage-based gate. So when the gate gets to a certain voltage, it'll allow electricity to be conducted across it, and the electricity can flow from the source to the drain, just like the neurotransmitters would flow from one nerve to another. Now, interestingly, GPUs and the brain end up having around the same amount of these smallest functional units. And even the largest GPU cluster in the world only has a few orders of magnitude more than our brain does. And I sort of imagine this as all of the neuron equivalent that it would take over the course of evolution to develop our brains into what they are today, and how they're all pre-processed and ready to go when we're a baby and we're able to live as a baby without any input. Now, as we move up in abstraction, the neuron will have thousands of these connections or synapses to other neurons. And as we move higher, these groups of cells will be able to perform functions. So in the visual cortex, for example, they can do things like recognize shapes or recognize rotations and recognize movement. And then you'll see the brain as a whole, we're able to recognize different parts of the brain that accomplish these tasks. And while the entire brain is spread out in function, it becomes a whole conscious unit. When we move up in abstraction with computers, it's sort of a similar story. So we start with these AND and OR gates and basically very basic logic gates, and then we can move up into things that can perform more complex tasks. And as you see here on the right side, this is the GA102, or the die that's used for the 3090 GPU from NVIDIA, and this will have all sorts of different areas of the chip that are used for different functions, including, for example, vision, memory, and all of the same sort of thinking tasks that you can imagine. And of course, storage, which is similar to the long-term memory in humans. Now, even something like the corpus callosum has its own computer analog. So our brain is basically symmetrical, and each half of the brain is able to perform all the functions of the other half of the brain. And so just like we need a switch, like the corpus callosum, to connect the two halves of our brains, we could do this with GPUs, and we can connect several GPUs so that they can act together as one. Now, at the highest level, we have what the computer is simulating, you could say, which is actually called a neural network because it's based off the neural network of our brain. And what you see here is that you have these artificial neurons that also have thousands of connections to each other, and they can perform these really abstract tasks. We also have these activation functions that are used, and this is very similar to the action potential in a neuron, where when you get to a certain threshold, then the output will change all at once. Now, you've probably heard this argument that since artificial neural networks is just a bunch of math in the computer that we could do by hand, there's no way that this could produce consciousness. However, your brain is also a form of a calculation device. And in theory, if you know all of the initial conditions for your brain, then you could simulate everything that it does. And at the end of the day, everything in the universe is just math. So you hear this talked about a lot in free will discussions, but basically both the brain and computers are mostly deterministic and mostly just doing math. Okay, so the question is, why aren't we believing the robots when they tell us that they're conscious? And really the only reason we believe each other when we say they're conscious is because we're saying it, and because we know in our own conscious mind that that's how we experience the world. The real mystery here is what is producing consciousness in animals, and so far we have no idea why we, meaning our souls or our subjective experience, is along for the ride with our apparently mostly deterministic brain. And recently, some scientists have proposed this idea of quantum consciousness simply due to the discovery of some entangled particles within neurons. The problem here is that most of what goes on in a neuron is on the scale of a molecule or larger, meaning quantum effects are going to be mostly negligible, and everything that goes on is going to be mostly deterministic. So unless you believe this, what right now is a pretty fringe theory of quantum consciousness, then humans and computers are operating in exactly the same way, which is they're operating mechanically and chemically. So my theory for this is that basically there's something else beyond our laws of physics and our understanding of the universe, and even maybe outside of the universe itself, that's producing consciousness. And like I said, with our brain, which works very mechanically through just sending chemicals or sending electrical signals, I really don't see why this couldn't also apply to robots. But definitely let me know what you think in the comments, because there's definitely tons of theories out there for what is producing consciousness. And also say whether you think whatever you think causes consciousness can also apply to robots. Now, if we take it for a fact that robots can have consciousnesses, this actually gives a tiny bit of credence to that kind of sci-fi concept of uploading yourself into a computer. Now, of course, if you did this after you died, you would have to assume that your soul would not somehow magically transfer into the computer. But you have a simulation of yourself that could be conscious and could potentially at least act like you. Also, if you could somehow merge your brain with a computer before you died, then potentially you could somehow live on as a computer. Okay? And if you'd like to hear more about that topic as far as fusing your brain and consciousness, I actually made a video about that a few months ago on my channel, so I'll link that down in the description. But with that being said, guys, thanks so much for watching and have a great day. Oh, and make sure to like and subscribe and share. Thanks.